So before we dive into today's doubleheader, I just wanted to give a really quick shout out to my sister's fiance, my future brother-in-law, Zach Gordon. He put together this awesome cover art, and so I was very happy that he made something that looked really cool. So I just wanted to give full credit to him for the cover art for today's video, and enjoy. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Scary Bad Reviews, and this is my intro. So, it is Monday, October 8th. I promised you guys a doubleheader tonight, and we've got one loaded up for you. Watched two movies throughout the day. Full reviews for both of them. I had Night of the Living Dead, which is, of course, an all-time classic. Classic movie, not just within the horror realm, but also in cinema in general. And my second of the two doubleheader movies is a late 50s classic, The Tingler. So to dive right on in, Night of the Living Dead, it was awesome to be able to go back and watch this movie again with the intent to review it. It had been a while since I sat down and watched the movie start to finish, and especially paid attention to details in it. There's not a whole lot to it when it comes to actual, plot points or dialogue or, interactions. There's a very limited number of actual characters. There's a very limited number of settings. There's a very limited number of actual events that happen in the plot. But it all just kind of combines together into this masterpiece of a movie. Like, everything in this, it's really weird because people look at it and they say, oh, it's 68, but they kept it in black and white, and there's only so many people in it, and this and that, and this and that. Excuse me. Certain decisions in it, people are like, oh, well, why did he do that? And a couple of them you don't really have a legitimate reason for, but they all combine together into this movie that is so much deeper than what it looks like on the surface level. The surface level, it's the birth of zombie movies, which is already a big enough deal in itself, even just for it being the surface of the movie. This movie birthed the idea of a zombie in modern cinema and in Hollywood, and it successfully did it with minimal prosthetics, minimal makeup, minimal gore, and really minimal vision on the zombies themselves. A lot of times, seeing them, they're just in passing, and it's just these quick glances of them walking super slowly outside of the house. I mean, there's one or two actual good attack scenes in the movie, but there's no real distinctive features that separate zombies from humans in this movie, and I think that's part of how it wants to play itself. The acting in it is great. I think that the few people that they have who have legitimate roles, other than to just walk around super slow and hold their arms out and being zombies, I think the few people that have legitimate main cast roles did a very good job. I think that they definitely display some of the tensions that they aimed to show in this movie, which I'm going to get into a little bit later. There's definitely an added suspense with the way that they interact with each other throughout the movie. You definitely feel the sense of panic from them throughout this whole ordeal. And it's very... On top of it being well acted, the lines were well written to display their panic and to cause these interactions between the people who are trying to survive this. So, getting a little bit deeper past the fact that it's just a zombie movie, this movie is very representative of a lot of different things in American society. So, even though to most people they'll watch it, they'll be like, oh, this is just the first zombie movie, this, that. The entirety of the movie was, in my mind, meant to show just how unprepared we were for the catastrophic events that could have happened during the Cold War. I mean, we had no idea what everyone else had. We had no idea if they were going to actually shoot it. We had no idea if we were going to actually shoot ours. And so the entire world, for a while, lived in fear of this nuclear fallout because of everyone just saying, what the hell, and just shooting off whatever they had. And so I think that this movie was meant to show that we had a certain level of unpreparedness as a country for if a catastrophic event really hit us and really took a toll on us. Society would start to crumble, people wouldn't be prepared, people would fall apart mentally, No one would really know what to do in the situation, and I think they even show examples of people in Washington not knowing what to do and not knowing how to act and not knowing what the plan is or how to work with each other to form a plan of action when something like this were to happen. So I think one of the deeper meanings of the movie when you sit down and watch it entirely is, man, if something had really happened during the Cold War, if they had really shot off nuclear weapons, we would have been screwed. I mean, we would not have been prepared for any of it. As much as they wanted to say that we were through propaganda and through forcing our ideals and, images to other countries that were opposing us, we were not prepared, and that's what this movie was trying to show. Another big societal issue that this movie shows is racial tensions post segregation. I mean, this movie came out in 1968, which is not even 10 years after the desegregation of the United States of America. I mean, you definitely see throughout the movie, with one of the main characters being African American, you definitely see that there is a written-in tension between him and one of the older white male characters, in that no matter what he proposes, they just don't want to do it, and they just don't want to believe him, and they don't want to follow him, and they don't want to work with him. They want to consistently blame him for certain things, say that he's absolutely insane. Instead of working with him to try to survive, they'd much rather butt heads with him to prove that they're right. That is definitely a major aspect of 2/3 of the movie. And then I think there's a very brief moment that displays the racism at the end of the movie that's still present in the United States, where, spoiler alert for anybody listening, skip ahead a little bit if you don't want to hear this, but at the end of the movie, he's the last one left in the house, and when the hunting parties come through to kill the zombies, they don't look at him at all. He comes out of the house, and they just immediately shoot, and then they walk up and they're like, this one was alright. And part of that is, okay, they're probably paranoid that anybody in the house could have been bitten, could have been infected, but another part of that was they didn't even wait for him to say if he was okay or for him to prove in any acts that he was a zombie. They just shot him. And so it's a significant fact that they just shot him since he's African American. They didn't hesitate. They just did it. So racial tensions definitely play into this, as well as the countrywide, nationwide tensions from the Cold War. So I think this movie had a lot more to it than just a simple zombie movie. I think this movie was a big-time cultural and societal commentary to really talk about what was happening in the world at the time, and it was super smart of him to just use the veil of these creatures that we just simply can't kill. What happens when our society starts to crumble? What happens when we have to interact with each other to survive? And so with the combination of all these, I gave this movie a 9 out of 10. I mean, this thing is an absolute timeless classic. It's a masterpiece. The societal commentary in it is kind of ahead of its time. A lot of people didn't talk about these kind of things, especially in any movie that was meant to scare you horror-wise. I mean, there had not been horror movies that talked about things like this before. And I think that kind of opened the gateway for other movies down the road to talk about big picture things like this, while under the veil of something that's going to try to scare you via jump scares, images, or gore. So I definitely hold true to that this movie is a 9 out of 10. I think it's an absolute masterpiece, and I definitely recommend it to anybody, not just horror movie fans, not people looking for a Halloween watch. If you haven't seen the movie, you need to see it. That movie is definitely a solid 9 out of 10. But to move into a different direction, the other movie that I watched for our doubleheader tonight is a 1956 cult kind of classic, The Tingler. Now, The Tingler is a completely different direction. The Tingler is a very goofy, gimmicky monster movie from the mid-50s. We get a great showing from Vincent Price. I mean, he just delivers everything like he normally does. He's an incredible actor, one of the founding fathers of the horror industry. He just steals the show, and he always has your attention everywhere he goes on screen because the movie was written for him to do that. The movie itself, fun fact, the movie itself was part of the whole in-theater gimmick wave of the mid to late 50s, where a lot of horror movies that were coming out, excuse me, a lot of the horror movies that were coming out had some sort of thing going on inside the theater while you were watching it to draw you into the movie or to draw you into the experience of watching the movie. This movie, with its installation and implementation of the monster, the Tingler, which was alive in every human and would feast and kill you off your fear, the monster, his weakness was screaming. So whenever we get scared, we scream to keep the monster from killing us. So there's actually a scene in the movie where they kind of break down the fourth wall. The scene is taking place inside of a theater, and the Tingler is loose in this theater. So what happens is that they cut off the projector, and the fourth wall is immediately broken. You see nothing on the screen, and all you hear is Vincent Price instructing everyone in the theater to scream as the Tingler is now loose and among us. We have to scream to keep it away from us. So what they used to do for the gimmick with this movie is they would pick random chairs inside the theater each day, and they would attach little motors to the bottom of the chairs. Now this wasn't all of them, this was only certain chairs within the theater, and they would attach the motors to them. And when that scene came up, they would have a switch to turn the motors on, and it would vibrate certain chairs within the theater. And so the people sitting in those chairs vibrating would start to scream because they thought the Tingler was attacking them. Similar gimmicks were used in other movies in the 50s. You had movies where people came out in costume to scare you. Another very notorious one was for House on the Haunted Hill. There was the scene where the skeleton drops out of the attic. They would have a skeleton actually hooked to a zip line and would send it flying across the theater from corner to corner during that scene. So you can definitely tell that this movie was made during that gimmick time, and that it was a big time we were able to get Vincent Price, let's write a short little movie around him that we can have some fun with and do some things in the theater. So there's definitely a little bit of a drawback of not being able to experience that while watching it on home video, but there's still a lot of things that this movie does well, and it's a lot of fun to watch. I mean, like I can't reiterate, Vincent Price steals every scene that he's in almost every movie he does, and they definitely wrote the part to fit him very well. The supporting characters do a good job at kind of playing a plot and a story around him and around this Tingler monster. The Tingler itself, the actual monster, it's super goofy to watch these scenes now that we have, Blu-ray restorations and 1080p and 4K televisions. Looking at it, it's so distinctly just a wet rubber mold of a centipede that they just pull along with a string. But there's still something that draws me into loving watching that on the screen. I don't know if it's the campiness or just the fun of it, but I thought it was awesome just watching this little thing just get pulled along by a string everywhere it wanted to go. And, of course, the notion that screaming was its weakness is perfect to play into the whole gimmick aspect and breaking the fourth wall of the movie. But all in all, watching this movie is definitely a lot of nostalgic fun. It's definitely one of the ones that you look back on the 50s and 60s and the old black and white movies that had goofy monsters in it, and it's like, okay, they actually did a decent job on this one, but it still feels super goofy nowadays with the CGI and the practical effects that we have now. It feels really out of place with modern cinema, but it's still a lot of fun to say, okay, this is where we came from. This is how we started. I had a lot of fun watching this movie, and I recommend it to horror fans and anybody looking for a good Halloween watch. I don't recommend it to people who aren't necessarily a fan of the genre and don't necessarily enjoy some of the older movies, because this is definitely a prime example of before these movies really took off, with production improvements and practical effects, the CG and everything like that. It's definitely a prime example of a movie that does well and has a lot of fun for people who can find the fun in it. So I gave this movie a 7 out of 10. A lot of it is based off of the fun of it and the great performance from Vincent Price in it. I can't reiterate that enough. Outside of that, everything in the movie is super goofy. Some of the other supporting roles feel really out of place. The creature itself, of course, looks goofy. For me, that was a positive, but in actually reviewing it, it would be a negative to people outside of the genre. So I gave it a solid 7 out of 10. It was a lot of fun, and I definitely enjoyed watching it. Alright, so that's our double header for the night. We're going to hopefully be back on schedule tomorrow. I'm currently planning on watching a modern sci-fi absolute trashterpiece. I did that on purpose. It's absolute trash, but it's so bad it's beautiful. In Sharktopus, modern sci-fi channel movie that showcases their horrible CGI but incredible creativity in creating just awful monsters. So I'm going to have a lot of fun being able to talk about that with everybody tomorrow. And we'll try to keep this on schedule. Just a reminder, I try to move the calendar of movies that I have around so that I can continue to play with and find the movies that I find most important. If you guys have a strong suggestion of a monster that you want to see me review during the month, definitely send it to me. I'll consider it. I'll weigh it against the calendar I have. I'm very well may put it in. I always like to change things around, and I always like to take requests. I love when people give me movies, especially if somehow I haven't seen them before. Then it's a lot of fun because it's a first viewing experience for me, and I can really just say what's off the top of my head. So send me in some new requests, and stay tuned tomorrow. Thanks for listening.